Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. Just finished another of the meetings, a broader meeting with Senate and House leadership, bipartisanly, but the leads, the chairs, and some of the staff. And I think the progress made, we have a chart of side-by-sides comparing apples to apples to apples, the proposals that are being made from the budget that I've had out, now a House budget and a Senate budget. And we've got a little bit of work to do on that, and we want to get an agreement where that is a public document to say, look, we all agree about inflation, we all agree on where these numbers are at, and we can start working from there. That's a really positive sign, a lot of good work being done, and this is easier said than done because of inflation, discretionary inflation, some of the programs that have inflation built in, to get everybody on the same sheet of music. And so I'm really encouraged by the work that was done there. And then we had a deeper dive by higher education leadership and Chairman Olson, or excuse me, Commissioner Olson from the Office of Higher Education, to do a deep dive and explain the funding around the state grant program and how closely it's tied, and those grant awards are tied to Pell Grants and student need at each of the universities. And so that's to help, because this year we have both a good and a bad problem. A good problem is that we have an enrollment increase in higher education, the fifth highest of any state in the country, but we're also seeing Pell Grants and FAFSA issues that are making the calculations a little difficult and the awards a little more nebulous in terms of what they're going to get. So that was good. I think we left on that in a good space. That Pell Grant, or excuse me, the state grant program, really important program, bipartisan support, public and private institutions, and that some changes that we had proposed to leave it less risky, that it's so dependent on the cuts that we're seeing from the federal government, and try and shore that up a little bit. But good progress. First week of April, I would say this bodes pretty well for us, that we're starting to come to consensus around the numbers, that what needs to be done. And all the budgets show cuts and responsible spending. I think it'll be dependent on how easily we can get to some agreements. With that, I'd be glad to answer a few questions.
How much are the federal cuts coming up behind closed doors? Is it affecting every single area?
Yeah, they're not really coming up in this meeting. Look, I understand that's kind of a sore subject, but I think you're seeing it play out in real time. And in the near future here, where I'm pressing my team, we're going to have a dashboard up that starts to show, almost like COVID, where you can track, you, especially in the press, can track of where those cuts are, where we anticipate them coming from, because they're happening so fast and without any lead into it. I'm telling my teams, if you've got a federal grant or federal program, to assume it's going to be cut, and start planning different scenarios accordingly. Because what happened with the Department of Health is that came out, and 170 people the next day are basically gone, and really important novel coronavirus and infectious disease tracking have been gutted. And that happened. It's going to happen in some of the employment space we have. I anticipate it's going to start to happen very soon in the education space. And what we're going to need, we as a state and we as the administration, we're going to need a dashboard that shows that, so when those cuts come, what's going to happen. But they're not really coming up in here yet. It had to be talked about today because of the relationship between when a Pell Grant goes down, a state grant goes up. We had to talk about it that way because that's what's impacting some of those numbers.
Governor, can you address job cuts at the Department of Health because of federal cuts?
Yeah, that was it. That was the programs that were tied to infectious disease. They came during COVID. These were grants that were going to extend out until, I believe, July of 26, most of them. And we got no notice on it other than the day of. They made the announcement, I believe, on the 24th, and on the 25th, our people were gone. And those were mostly in the areas of infectious disease monitoring, some of the lab work. We also saw those cuts into Title X, which is reproductive health and things like mammogram screenings. And one of the areas I'm deeply concerned with is we're seeing the cuts also impacting some of our student chemical dependency work that we've been doing. For the first time, we're actually seeing some significant reductions in usage and overdose death. And right at the same time, we're going to see some significant cuts that basically those programs will be eliminated because they're not funded statewide. We use them in addition to the state programs.
As a quick follow-up, today is Rare Disease Advocacy Day here in Minneapolis as well. They're concerned about federal cuts research into that area. Do they still have full state support for whatever you can do for the rare disease kind of?
Yeah, and the folks that were here too, I named today the month on limb loss and limb differences today. It's a group that I started working with called Wiggle Your Toes, that they got funding for research at the VA system, and we have a law that went into effect January 1st of this year that has insurance companies need to pay for orthotics or prosthetics for people, and that's not just so they can get around it. So if you need that orthotic to go skiing or whatever, they can get that. Those are things that a small number of people, but it really impacts them heavily. I think that's the thing I'm deeply concerned about, because most of those programs are almost all dependent on federal aid.
Governor, can you talk about your education budget? The House is making no cuts in their plan. Schools have testified that some of the cuts could be devastating when they're already facing shortfalls. Can you just talk about your rationale for where you're making the cuts and answering those concerns about this is a bad time for cuts to education?
Yeah, we're slowing the growth, and I would say so again, that both at the federal level and the state level, we're fine in the short run. And I'm making the case that the drivers in this are basically inflationary costs and more people entering the system around two areas: disability waivers and special education. And what we're talking about is making responsible slowing of growth, not cutting the programs. We're just not doing 13% increases, we're doing a 2% increase. And I think around education, I'm trying to guard those programs that really matter to me, because I think, again, I would make this case, I don't think the worst things the administration is going to do have been done yet. Those are still coming, and I would make the case that we see it across all agencies, and the reasons that everybody's asking to put some in is because the savings to make sure the budget is stabilized are coming out of those areas. But look, I've spent my entire life in education. I've advocated my entire career around it. I'm not going to do things that take it away from the services that we need to provide. But I think realistically we have to understand we're not in a position with these cost drivers to be able to increase the spending that's being asked for. We need to slow it.
Governor, why are you saying worse than that, Mayor Carter?
Yeah, do I think this administration? Yes, they are detaining people who are here legally and shipping them to El Salvadorian prisons. They are cutting randomly from infectious disease and programs that prevent student addiction. I think they're just getting warmed up, and I could fully expect that as they continue to flaunt the rule of law, that there will be cuts in areas that we are required to provide those services with, that I think it's not going to be long, and we'll find them here in Minnesota. People are going to die because of these cuts that they made in. Our tax dollars that we sent to them, appropriated by the U.S. Congress through the Constitution, are being illegally cut by this administration. So I think people are lulled into a sense of, this is as bad as it's going to get. I'm an optimistic person, but I'm not naive. The worst is yet to come, in my opinion.
Questions about your meeting with Mayor Carter.
Yeah.
One, is there a state role to play in this situation with Allianz Tower downtown, emptying out, Skyway closing?
Yeah.
Seems like public health or economic issue there. And then two, can the state afford to help the city with this?
Well, I think that's what we're going to find out. I make, whether it is St. Paul or whether it's Piers or whether it's Good Thunder, the state has a role in all of our communities, whether it's helping with infrastructure and things. And as far as St. Paul goes, I do think there's a role because the St. Paul hosts the state capitol. I also think that we can make an impact on it. I'm going to see what the proposals are. Now look, I have made no bones about it. I think there's a state role in some of these things, whether it is a infrastructure project like a water treatment plant or a stadium like US Bank Stadium. And I think the mayor is going to make the case of what the state can do. I don't know in this place where we're at. They may be talking infrastructure bonds and bonding, and that's an appropriate thing for a mayor to do. So.
And what about the tower? Are you concerned about the Allianz Bank Tower downtown?
Well, we're going to hear what they have to say, and I think that issue, this whole idea of commercial real estate space, the whole idea of office space or whatever, is a much bigger issue. I want to hear where the mayor's at on it.
Any response about the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Yeah, I do have thoughts about the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, and I have it not on a partisan basis. I'm not going to try and pretend like I didn't care for that reason. But I would rather not be in a partisan position on a court race. And what was being attempted by Elon Musk in Wisconsin was an affront to democracy. It was a gross distortion of what we believe. And I don't think there's a clearer case of somebody just simply trying to buy a court for their own small ends. I find it ironic that that Tesla's in a court case that is fairly significant in Wisconsin, that it might be to his best advantage. The best advantage to get rid of our weather forecasters. He says he wants to do it, or get rid of NASA, so he wants to do it. This guy is a menace. He is an unelected billionaire, and to have him put himself out there, and he said that race will determine the direction of the country and how popular President Trump is, and it would determine the direction of Western civilization. If that's true, I'm glad to say that the oligarchs lost, democracy won, and we're in better space than we were yesterday. So I have pretty strong feelings about that, and I'm really proud of Wisconsin for getting out and voting. So, all right, folks, thank you.